Hi everybody, this is Chris Helzer. I am the Director of Science for the Nature Conservancy in Nebraska. I'm also a photographer and I write the Prairie Ecologist blog. And today I'm going to take you on a quick tour of a little area that doesn't look like it has much at first glance, but turned out to be a pretty neat place to look at. I'm out here wearing a goofy hat in late March. This is kind of a little wet slough area, kind of a little drainage into the pond of the prairie that our family owns, a little piece of land here in Nebraska. And it's just kind of a beautiful day. I needed to get outside. I wanted to come see what was going on. When I first got to the prairie, I was looking to see what kinds of plants were greening up. Not many were, but this black-eyed Susan caught my eye, and so I took some pictures of that for a while. Then I wandered down closer to the pond and looked for tracks and scat, which is a fancy word for poop, and I found this coyote scat, which I was sure was coyote because of the size and because of the hairs inside it. Then I found this skull right on the edge of the pond, which I'm pretty sure is a raccoon skull, based on the teeth. Raccoons are omnivores, so they have sharp teeth in the front and chewing teeth in the back. Eventually I found myself right here, where water from the south drains into the wetland, and the water levels had gone down enough that there was exposed mud along the edge of the water. It just looked like a good place to sit for a minute and see what I could find. So you might ask yourself, why is this guy laying in the mud on the edge of a small pond when there's not really anything moving around that's obvious? There's some ducks, but they're way down on the other end. And it just seems like a silly thing to do, and that's a fair statement. But turns out a place like this that looks empty is actually really full of life when you start looking and kind of get down on your hands and knees and get muddy. Once I started looking, the first thing that I saw were little tiny spiders running around, which I'm pretty sure were juvenile wolf spiders. And I think they were feeding on another little tiny creature called a shore fly. I never saw them catch one, but they were around a lot, and that was my best guess as to what they were feeding on. There were some bigger flies too, like dung flies, but they seemed a little big for the size of the tiny little spiders that I was looking at. The next thing that caught my eye was what I thought was a tiger beetle at first, but turns out it's called a marsh ground beetle, which looks a lot like a tiger beetle, but it's a little smaller. But it was gorgeous, this shiny green, glittering color. And just as I finished looking at that, something out of the corner of my eye started crawling, and it was a millipede, which is similar to a centipede, except that it has 2 sets of legs on every segment of its body instead of 1. I also saw several of these tiny little beetles. This one was up on top of a stick. I thought maybe it was going to fly off while I was watching it, but it never did. This little ant looked like it was stuck on basically a tiny little island surrounded by water. So I watched it for a little while and took a few pictures, and then I laid a piece of grass between that island and the shore so that it could crawl to safety. A few plants had started to germinate down in the mud too. I don't know if some of them were smartweed. That's a common plant that I see in that area during the summers, but at this point all that had popped up above the ground were the cotyledons, or the kind of the pre-leaves, the first leaves that pop out in the spring. And then there were some bigger animals around as well, including a couple of killdeer that were calling back and forth to each other. And down further there were some shovelers, which are a duck that looks sort of like a mallard with a green head but with a much bigger, darker bill. And other than those birds, most of what I saw were tiny little things that I never would have noticed if I wouldn't have taken the time to lay quietly in the mud on the edge of the water and just see what came by. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it inspires you to go out and find your own little natural area where you can spend some time. It doesn't have to be a big place. It doesn't have to be something that has a lot of big animals running around. If you take the time and look and really pay attention, there's interesting life just about anywhere you go.